Hello, my name is Joe Wasserman. I welcome all of you to this edition of Peace is Possible. In this program, we give voice to those who are advocating for peace around the world and for a foreign policy that puts peace first. Many of these voices are not being heard in the mainstream media. Peace is possible if the American people stand up as one and call for it. Please watch the following video entitled "How Do We Get to a World Beyond War?" put out by the organization World Beyond War, where different views are expressed about the urgent need for peace. Please consider going to their website, World Beyond War, to get more information about some of the very interesting campaigns this group is involved in.
So the war system is based upon three simple myths. The first myth is that humans are naturally violent. The second myth is that war is inevitable. And the third myth is that war makes us safe. And to create a world without war, we have to debunk all three of those myths. And we also have to offer a more effective security paradigm to replace the outdated war paradigm.
Demilitarization and disarmament are essential to move into a world beyond war because both addressed the major elements of the social institution of war. Demilitarization is about changing people's thinking, and disarmament is about changing methods to deal with disputes.
Nonviolent resistance is essential to moving to a world beyond war. It's the most creative and powerful mechanism for social change that we've ever seen.
Governments won't move unless people push. There's nothing more important than well-organized public opinion from global civil society.
To get to a world beyond war, we need to recognize that we know that there are more and more effective alternatives to war and violence. And that includes achieving security without the use of force.
Yes, women are victims, but they are not passive victims. They are taking action and using their agency to find peaceful solutions and offer them, present them to decision makers so we can realize a world beyond war.
Study War No More is very important because history is full of war heroes, war glories, glorifying war, but we have never glorified peace.
Well, as we look at our society, there's no way in the world that we can go to a world beyond war unless we stop our very offensive foreign policy and military operations and come to a policy of actually defending the United States, not pushing the United States and its policies out on other people.
Yes, I think that giving people a vision of stable peace and showing them that such a vision is realistic is going to be very powerful in shunting us out of the war system.
If we invest early on in diplomacy and foreign aid, we can head off conflicts before they get so bad. And we can see an entire new world with more security in more places than we've ever seen by investing so heavily in the military.
The world desperately needs a working system of governance. And the closest we have to that is international law. And it doesn't matter whether international law is based on morality or whether it's based just on a bunch of lawmakers saying, we're making this law.
a militarized response to violent conflict is inherently political, it's inherently resource-based, and it is the furthest away from actual concerns and care for safety and security for civilians. A civilian-led defense, a civilian-led protection force it's a holistic approach to stabilization for including the most people possible in the safest possible environment.
One of the stereotypes that people tend to hold on to is that religion is the cause of conflict, but it's also a powerful resource for building a world beyond war. Religion can be a resource in stopping conflict, in healing, and in creating a world of lived peace.
War is inherently racist. If we don't deal with the connections between war and racism, then we won't ever get to a world beyond war.
Peace education is essential to move beyond war because without understanding fully what war is, its institutional and systemic characteristics, knowing something of the possible alternatives, having the values that leads one to want to explore the alternatives and the skills to do that exploration and take action is essential to any change in the system.
You know, it's interesting when I think about technology's use to moving to a world beyond war. You know, human beings are tool creators, and that's something that is hugely important to us. And so if the most important thing we can do is end war, then obviously like the tools that we create are going to be hugely instrumental into helping make that possible.
First of all, I think ecological security in terms of indigenous rights are not really, it's not set aside necessarily under those terms, but war is still like a knee-jerk reaction to a breach in security, and ecological security for indigenous peoples has an enormous cultural component. We see in places like Standing Rock how peaceful protection is addressed with excessive brutality. And until indigenous sovereign rights, the nation's rights to ecological security are fully honored and the protective measures are implemented, this ongoing colonial legacy will continue.
In order to make peace possible, we need to make sure our voices are heard in Congress. Congress, in turn, needs to exercise its constitutional power to make decisions on issues of war and peace. This power has been undermined by the executive use of military power with little, if any, congressional authority. It is therefore urgent that Congress hear from the people on the need for the Congress to stand up for peace and exercise its constitutional power on issues of peace and war. I urge you to place calls to the offices of our two senators, Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy, and the congressperson from our district, John Larson, in support of the resolutions I will be presenting in this program. Please ask them to sign on to these resolutions as co-sponsors, if they have not already. In most cases, they have not, with the exception of Chris Murphy. Please have a pen and paper ready to write down the names of the resolutions and contact info. You can reach the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121. That's 202-224-3121, or you could simply Google Congressional Switchboard number, and that you'll get it that way too. They will connect you to our two senators and to our congressperson. Again, the number is 202-224-3121 for the Congressional Switchboard. I'll repeat this number later so you can get a paper and pencil. When you reach the offices, you will speak to an aide. Please state your name and address and let them know which resolutions you are supporting or opposing. Ask the congressperson or senator, ask the congressperson or senator to co-sponsor these resolutions. Ask for a response in writing if possible. Try to be friendly. 1. Urge our U.S. senators and congresspeople to speak out against U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. We have no right to interfere in the sovereign affairs of another nation. The history of U.S. intervention in Latin America is one of overthrowing the elected governments of Chile, Guatemala, and Honduras, and instituting terror and torture under thugs such as Pinochet, which had U.S. intelligence backing. The motivation for U.S. intervention in Latin America and around the world is control over fossil fuels with a human rights cover. Please ask our senators and Congressperson Larson to co-sponsor H.R. 1004 and S.J. Resolution 11, both of which would cut funding for war on Venezuela without congressional approval. In fact, we are getting a very one-sided picture of events in Venezuela by the same media that pounded us with stories about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We need to understand that much of the suffering in Venezuela is due to U.S.-imposed sanctions on that country. Nations that trade with Venezuela are subject to penalty by the U.S. It is the people of Venezuela who are suffering as a result of these sanctions. We also need to understand that there were observers to the recent election which Mr. Maduro won. These observers attested to the fairness of the election. The Chavez-Maduro regime has subsidized food prices, built low-income housing, and provided schools and health care for the poor. All of this has been ignored by our mainstream media. 2. We also need to oppose the drift towards war with Iran. The pro-war hawks in the Trump administration are itching to send our young people to a preventable war with Iran. Iran is being targeted by the Trump administration, despite the fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency had stated that Iran had been in compliance with the agreement in regard to development of enriched uranium. There is a resolution to oppose an unconstitutional war against Iran. Senator Murphy has signed on as a co-sponsor, S. 1039. Please ask Senator Blumenthal to sign on as a co-sponsor as well. Please encourage John Larson to co-sponsor H.R. 2354, which also opposes an unconstitutional war against Iran. That's S. 1039 and H.R. 2354. Please call in support of the Hold the Line resolution, LYNE, to cut funding for new forms of nuclear weapons. The development of new forms of nuclear weapons, sometimes called the modernization of nuclear weapons, endangers us all and by and large is being left out of the public discussion. Many of these weapons may be considered usable by future generals or presidents. Many of these weapons being developed could go undetected by radar, thus increasing the temptation they would be used. Many are low-yield nuclear weapons which may be integrated into our conventional war machinery. All of this leads us down the road of an expensive and dangerous arms race with Russia and China. The world has come too close to nuclear war too many times. We need agreements to limit and reduce nuclear weapons, and we need to cut the funding for dangerous nuclear weapon modernization or low-yield nuclear weapons. Many fear the breaking of the INF Treaty with the Russians has opened the door to the creation of these low-yield nuclear weapons which may be considered usable. Please ask our senators to support H.R. 1086 and S. 401 or the Hold the Line resolution, line being spelled L-Y-N-E. Please ask Senator Blumenthal to consider his support for nuclear weapon modernization, and to support the Hold the Line resolution. Please call in support of the INF Treaty, the START Treaty, and other treaties to reduce the nuclear weapon danger. There is a resolution to require an act of Congress prior to any first use of nuclear weapons. This is intended to keep the first strike use of nuclear weapons out of the hands of Donald Trump or any other president who may be tempted to use nuclear weapons on a first strike basis. Chris Murphy has signed on to the Senate version. He should be thanked, And Senator Blumenthal should be asked to sign on as well. Ask Senator Blumenthal to sign on to S-200. Please ask Congressperson Larson to co-sponsor H.R. 669 this session, as he did support this resolution last session, H.R. 669. H.R. 921 should be supported as well to create a no first strike policy regarding nuclear weapons. Such a no first strike policy would make the world a much safer place in case war breaks out between nations with nuclear weapons. That's H.R. 921. I would encourage people to leave a message with John Larson in support of that resolution. House Resolution 302 should be supported as well. This embraces the goals of the 2017 treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, which the nuclear nations have refused to sign. The American people should be informed of these efforts to abolish nuclear weapons, and these efforts need to be supported. The use of nuclear weapons anywhere in the world could very well lead us to nuclear winter, famine, and the end of civilization. People need to be more aware of this before we agree to move ahead with a new generation of nuclear weapons. That's House Resolution 302. Again, I would encourage people to encourage John Larson to co-sponsor that as well. The War Powers Act would cut military aid to the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates that is connected to the war on the people of Yemen. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are conducting a brutal war against the people of Yemen. This is a war that has resulted in the denial of food and medicine to the people of Yemen and attacks on civilians. Our military support for the Saudis and United Arab Emirates is involving the U.S. in this war. The War Powers Act tries to rein in unchecked executive power, which has brought us into dangerous wars and has brought us into a very brutal war against the people of Yemen. Senator Murphy has been a leader in support of the War Powers Act and is a co-sponsor of the War Powers Act. Senator Blumenthal and Congressperson Larson have also signed on as well as co-sponsors. But President Trump has vetoed it. Please thank our senators and congressperson for their support for the War Powers Act and ask that they work for a veto-proof majority in Congress in support of the War Powers Act. Please ask John Larson to co-sponsor the Berta Caceres Human Rights Resolution to cut military aid to the military of Honduras. Berta Caceres was assassinated while defending indigenous lands against logging development. This assassination appears to be a part of a pattern of assassinations of environmental and indigenous leaders in Honduras. In fact, an Honduran criminal court found an active military officer involved with this assassination. This makes it all the more imperative that military aid to the Honduran military should be cut until these cases are resolved. Please call Congressman Larson's office to ask him to co-sponsor H.R. 1945 and to follow the example of Congressperson Himes, who has co-sponsored this resolution. The resolution would not affect humanitarian aid to the people of Honduras. It would only cut military aid to the military. Please urge all of our senators and congresspeople to oppose more increases in the military budget and to support peace conversion. More submarines equipped with nuclear weapons will not make us more secure. U.S. wars and military bases around the world are not in the interests of the American people. We can create many more jobs by investing in healthcare, schools, infrastructure, and renewable energy. Eisenhower pointed out that money going to build and maintain these weapons is taken from the resources we need to feed and house people. I agree with this. Please ask our senators and congresspeople to support the Congressional Progressive Caucus People's Budget, which proposes to rein in Pentagon spending and to oppose increases in the military budget. It is urgent that we work for peace and international understanding. In an age of nuclear weapons, war is the road to catastrophe. This is made even more dangerous in that nuclear weapons are on hair trigger alert, which leaves very little time, perhaps minutes, to decide if there's an error in the warning system or an actual attack. Hillary Clinton actually made reference to the situation in one of her debates with Donald Trump. Let me repeat, the world has come too close to nuclear war too many times. In 1995, the Russians mistook a weather satellite for an oncoming missile. The so-called nuclear briefcase was open. There were other close calls. Again, nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert leaves very little time to decide if we are under attack or if there's a problem with the warning system. This is all the more reasons why we need to reduce nuclear weapons and build bridges of international communication rather than build a new generation of nuclear weapons and enter into a dangerous arms race. We need to work together as a species to eliminate nuclear weapons and to oppose any further development of these most horrible weapons. The wars the U.S. conducted in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and our military involvement in Libya and Syria did not and does not serve to make the world or our nation more secure. International differences can be resolved without war. We do not need to send our brave soldiers all around the world at the expense of critical priorities in our own nation. I believe we can best honor our brave soldiers and veterans by working for peace and preventing war. If all of this makes sense to you, please join the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition. We have organized 3 state peace conferences, hand-delivered hundreds of postcards and letters for peace to our congressional offices, and helped to organize the annual Hiroshima observance in Hartford. We will be working to put peace on the agenda in Congress and in our nation. Please consider joining us and participating in our monthly meetings. If you would like more information, you can contact me at joewass64@yahoo.com, Joe Wasserman. Again, joewass64@yahoo.com, or you can call me at 860-561-1897. Again, let me repeat some of the resolutions. First of all, you could reach the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121. S-200 H.R. 669 requires an act of war by Congress prior to any first use of nuclear weapons. H.R. 921 will establish a policy of the U.S. regarding no first use of nuclear weapons. H.R. 1004 and S.J. Resolution 11, no funding for war in Venezuela without congressional approval. H.R. 1086 and S.401, Hold the Line Resolution, LYNE, to cut funding for new forms of nuclear weapons, the low-yield nuclear weapons. That's the one that Senator Murphy has co-sponsored on the Senate side. We need more co-sponsors. S312 is the Prevention of the Arms Race Act. House Resolution 302 embraces the goals of the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons that was concluded in 2017. H.R. 1945 cuts military aid to the Honduran military until the cases involving the assassination of Berta Cáceres and other environmentalists are resolved. S-1039 and H.R. 2354, Prevention of an Unconstitutional War with Iran. And the other thing I would urge people to consider is H.R. 2407, to promote human rights of Palestinian children under Israeli occupation. There was a recent UN report pointing out that there were massive human rights violations on the part of the Israeli forces in the peaceful demonstrations in Gaza a number of months ago. I also urge that people call to oppose the increases in the military budget as well. I will now read from an excerpt from President Eisenhower's speech warning us about the industrial military complex. In the councils of government, we must guard against acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Disarmament with mutual honor and confidence is a continuing imperative. Together we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. As one who has witnessed the horror and lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war could utterly destroy the civilization which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. Again, that's from President Eisenhower's farewell address, or one of his last speeches as president. I fear there is a danger that this military-industrial complex talked about by Eisenhower may lead us into a third world war. NATO war games right near the Russian border and our military involvement in Syria are both extremely dangerous and should be opposed. In both cases, there is a danger of a U.S.-Russia confrontation. This point should also be brought out in your calls to the offices and in conversations as you call in support of the peace resolutions covered in this presentation. Our best hope for survival lies in international cooperation and mutual understanding across all borders. This is the only way we could deal with the threats of nuclear weapons, global warming, scarcity of food, and public health issues. Again, let me give a quick quote from Dr. Martin Luther King on this as a Riverside speech. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concerns beyond one's tribe, race, and class and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for humanity and mankind. This oft misunderstood, this oft misinterpreted concept, so rarely dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as weak and cowardly, has now become an absolute necessity for survival of man.